Good Monday morning, and here we go. We get to jump into this week, and as we do, we change chapters. Every week is a new chapter, right? We were 9th chapter last week of the book of Hebrews. Now we move into the 10th chapter. We're nearing the end of the book. It's really getting good. So let's jump in. As we're looking for something for our mind to meditate upon, for it to get down into our spirit and transform our life. So we jump into Hebrews chapter 10. Oh, this is a large chapter, so we're doing about between 5 and 7 verses a day. It'll vary each day depending upon how we can manage the chapter. We don't want to cut off right in the middle of a thought. And so some will be shorter, others will be lengthier passages that we look at. So he has talked the inspired writer of the book of Hebrews has dealt with the idea of the high priest and the tabernacle. So he has exploded the first covenant and shown how it has been replaced with a new covenant, with a new high priest after the order of Melchizedek, which is only mentioned, remember, in the book of Genesis in the 14th chapter and in the 110th Psalm. It's like this way out of left field thing that had been mentioned, and then suddenly it becomes the center feature. And so this is something that you have to keep your eye on when it comes to the Lord, his revelation. There are things that he mentions, and then later it becomes the really big deal. So I'll tell you what, you need to pay attention. This is something that reverberates in my spirit. I always need to pay attention. I don't want to miss anything. So let's press on into the book of Hebrews chapter 10. And he now begins to talk about the law. Now he's talking about the law, the sacrificial law system. And we can put it in these terms, the Judaistic cultus. Now I use the word cultus, not cult. The Judaistic cultus is the form of worship, the way that they went about sacrifices and offerings. And now he's taking up the idea of the law. The law is only a shadow. Here's that word again, only. It tends to minimize it. Well, you only play one sport every year. You only can play one instrument. And when kids use that word, they're minimizing what it is you do. Well, here is a word of minimization. The law is only a shadow of the good things that are coming. Moses was instructed to do what he saw on the mountain. He saw the temple of God and then built a facsimile with skins and tapestry. And it was gorgeous. It was beautiful. It was high technology. It was wonderful. Then later Solomon took that pattern and expanded upon it, enlarged it, and he made the magnificent temple in Jerusalem. Now we sit in 2021, we have to look back to around 70 to 73 AD for the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem by Titus. So they have been almost 2,000 years without a temple, without the cultus, without the Judaistic cultus, the Orthodox Judaism expressed in a high priesthood, offerings, sacrifices of goats and bulls and rams and so on. The law is only a shadow. It's a symbolization. It is a tangible expression of something that is much more magnificent, not the realities themselves. For this reason, it can never, by the same sacrifices repeated endlessly, year after year. And why does that happen? Because people mess up, sin, break God's law, and they need to come with an offering, a sacrifice. It cannot, it can never make perfect those who draw near to worship. It can't do it. Otherwise, would they not have stopped being offered? If the gift was effective, you wouldn't have to offer it again. But it's going to have to be offered again. What did he make the point of late in the last chapter? It can't cleanse the worshiper from consciousness of sin and guilt. It can't get it done. For the worshipers would have been cleansed once for all, and would no longer have felt guilty for their sins. But what did they do? They tended to feel guilty because their conscience could not be cleansed. But those sacrifices are an annual reminder of sins. It is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. All they can do is cover them and defer the payment for the next year. So we think about that idea of deferring a car loan payment. Here's what you do. You can't make a payment that month. It's been a tough month. So you pay a fee. That fee is a small fee, a deferment that moves that payment to the end of the loan, and then the interest gets laid upon that payment. Guess what? If you've contracted for 48 payments or 60 payments or 72 payments and 96? I don't know, hundreds of payments. You are not going to get out of that payment. You are simply going to defer it to the end of the loan. What had Israel been doing year after year? They hadn't been paying for their sins. They had been deferring the judgment for their sins another year. They had been putting it off. They had been deferring the payment. But here's the terrible news. The payment still had to be made. They still had guilt for that sin. It is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. They could defer it. They could, when you're agreeing to a deferment, you're saying, yes, I messed up. I couldn't make the payment this month. You're agreeing to their terms that it's not something they did. It's not their fault. It's your fault. So all the law could do is say, hey, it's my fault. It's my fault. Therefore, when Christ came into the world, he said, sacrifice and offering you did not desire. So all along, after 1,000 years of doing sacrifices, wouldn't you tend to believe that God is really into blood sacrifices? No. All along there's been hints, there's been expressions of God saying, I'm looking for mercy, not sacrifice. It's not the blood of bulls and goats that I'm looking for. I'm looking for a broken and contrite spirit. I'm looking for somebody to agree with me that they are broken and undone. Therefore, when Christ came into the world, he said, sacrifice and offering you did not desire, but a body you prepared for me. Now, what he's doing here, the author of Hebrews, is quoting from a messianic psalm, the 40th psalm. And he is quoting from David's messianic psalm because David had prophetic insight into revelation that God had given him about the future. And so David now has a promise that his son will rule on his throne. In other words, the Son of David. So that title, Son of David, is really important. It's messianic. So when David is prophesying certain things, he's actually speaking of that one who is going to come. So he is speaking as the King of Israel, but he's also speaking prophetically because he has the anointing of prophet and king. The anointing of prophet and king. Saul had the anointing of prophet and king, and he dropped the ball big time. He blew it. David was a man after God's own heart. He was anointed by Samuel with the anointing of prophet and king. Therefore, when Christ came into the world, he said. So he's taking the words of David and he's cutting and pasting them upon. He's not putting them in the mouth of Jesus. Yes, he is. He is doing that. But he is characterizing what Jesus would say and had said. He said, sacrifice and offering you did not desire, but a body you prepared for me. This moves us into the idea of Jesus as the high priest offering himself. With burnt offerings and sin offerings, you were not pleased. That is an amazing revelation. But David got a hold of that. David got a hold of that, and it's recorded in the 40th Psalm. With burnt offerings and sin offerings, you were not pleased. What is he pleased with? This is just a reminder of our guilt. This is not what delights the heart of God. What delights the heart of God is when we come with a broken and contrite spirit, and then he can transform and change our desires. What pleased God about David is he was a man after God's own heart. He was pursuing relationship with God. This is what pleases God. Sin gets in the way of that pursuit, and it must be confessed and dealt with. But ultimately, deferring the note, deferring the payment, one more payment to the end of the note, doesn't cure the problem. You need the payments to be made and completely forgiven of your debt. With burnt offerings and sin offerings, you were not pleased. Then I said, here I am. This is words put in the mouth of the Messiah. And didn't Jesus basically say, here I am. It is written about me in the scroll. I have come to do your will, my God. How did Jesus put it? Lord, if there's any way that this cup can pass from me, what's the cup? I need to make the payment for all that sin that's been deferred. All those sacrifices that have been offered up that deferred that payment, I need to make the payment. They couldn't make the payment. I need to make the payment. He was going to have to suffer and die. And so he has said, not my will. He's recorded as saying this several times. Not my will, but your will be done. How's it stated from Psalm 40? I have come to do your will, my God. Man, aren't you glad that Jesus came to take care of all those deferred notes? All that guilt, all that shame, all that brokenness, all that tragedy, all that illness, all that sickness, all that disease. The blood of bulls and goats, the burnt offerings, the burned carcasses, the ashes, the sprinklings, all of that. All it could do was remind us of our sin and remind us that there's a bill that's due. But Jesus paid it. Jesus' blood was shed, and it made the payment that wiped out all of the sin. How great is that? That's something worth thinking about today. Lord bless you as you meditate upon that. I know life is going to come to you as you allow your mind to run through those verses, those 7 verses over and over today. Lord bless you. We'll see you tomorrow as we pick up verse number 8. We'll see how many we cover tomorrow. Until then, grace and peace.